As a paramedic for over a decade, Trevor Ross had trained himself to evaluate a crisis in seconds. But the hardest emergencies to spot aren't the ones with flashing lights and sirens. They are the quiet ones happening right on the sidewalk. When Trevor pulled his truck over to help a soaked, elderly woman on a freezing Portland night, he thought he was just doing his job. He had no idea that the woman he was putting into his passenger seat was someone intimately tied to his own wife's darkest chapter. Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. Trevor Ross was driving home through downtown Portland on a Friday night in mid-November with his wife Cassidy in the passenger seat, and the rain was coming down in that specific Pacific Northwest way, not a dramatic downpour, but a steady, relentless, soaking drizzle that never let up, the kind that left the streets gleaming under the streetlights. They just finished dinner at a Thai place on Burnside celebrating absolutely nothing important. Just the fact that they both had the same night off for once, which happened maybe twice a month between Trevor's paramedic shifts and Cassidy's high school teacher schedule that ate up every evening with grading and lesson planning. He was 35 and she was 33, and they'd been married for 4 years, together for 7, and they'd hit that comfortable stage where dinner conversation was 50% work stories and 50% arguing about whether they needed to stop at Fred Meyer for groceries on the way home. Trevor was in the middle of explaining why his partner, Brad, had almost gotten them both written up that morning for letting a patient's dog ride in the ambulance, when Cassidy pointed out the windshield and said, "Oh God, look at that poor woman," with the kind of voice that meant she felt bad, but also really hoped Trevor wouldn't do anything about it. There was a bus stop coming up on the right side of Morrison Street, one of those covered bench situations that provides exactly zero protection when the rain's coming in sideways. And huddled on the bench was an older woman with a garbage bag wrapped around her shoulders and a shopping cart next to her, piled with what looked like her entire life in black trash bags. Her hair was plastered to her head, her face was turned down toward the ground, and even from 30 feet away through rain-covered windows, you could tell she was soaked straight through to the bone. Trevor's foot was already moving toward the brake before his brain fully processed what he was doing. And Cassidy knew that look because she'd been married to a paramedic long enough to recognize when his helper instinct kicked in and rational thought took a back seat. "Trev, we can't pick up every person we see. It's late. We're both exhausted. There are shelters she can go to." Cassidy said it gentle but firm in that way she talked to her students when they were about to make a questionable decision. And Trevor knew she had a point, but he was already pulling over to the curb about 20 feet past the bus stop. "I know, baby, but look at her. It's maybe 40 degrees, and she's completely soaked. I just want to see if she needs medical attention or a ride somewhere warm. 5 minutes tops, I promise." Cassidy sighed the long-suffering sigh of someone who'd lost this argument about 100 times before. "Fine, but I'm staying in the car with the doors locked because I've seen enough true crime documentaries to know how this goes. You be careful." Trevor grabbed his work jacket from the back seat and got out into the rain that immediately started soaking through his shirt, and he jogged back to the bus stop, trying not to slip on the wet sidewalk. The woman looked up as he approached, and her face did that thing homeless people's faces do when someone walks toward them. A mixture of hope and wariness and exhaustion that came from never knowing if the person approaching was going to help or hurt or just walk past pretending not to see you. Trevor stopped a respectful distance away and used his work voice, the calm, non-threatening tone he'd perfected over 12 years as a paramedic dealing with people in crisis. "Hey there, I'm Trevor. I'm a paramedic. I noticed you're pretty soaked and it's freezing out here. Are you okay? Do you need any medical help?" The woman studied his face for a few seconds, like she was trying to determine if this was a trick, and then she shook her head and said, "I'm fine, just waiting for the rain to let up, thank you though," in a voice that was educated and articulate in a way that always surprised people who thought homeless meant uneducated. Trevor knelt down so he was at her eye level instead of towering over her. "The rain's not supposed to let up until tomorrow morning. There's a shelter a few blocks from here on 3rd Avenue. Would you let me give you a ride there? Get you out of this weather?" The woman, who looked to be in her late 50s with gray hair and a face that was weathered but had probably been pretty once, pulled the garbage bag tighter around her shoulders. I don't want to be any trouble. I've managed this long, I can manage a little longer. And Trevor recognized that tone too. The pride that was sometimes the only thing people had left when everything else was gone. It's no trouble at all. My wife and I are heading that direction anyway. The car's warm and dry. You'd actually be doing me a favor because she'll be mad at me all night if I left you out here and you ended up sick. He smiled when he said it, and the woman's expression cracked just slightly, and after a long moment she nodded. All right, but just to the shelter. I don't want to impose beyond that. Trevor helped her stand up and grabbed her shopping cart, wheeled it back toward his truck while the woman walked beside him, moving slowly like her joints hurt from the cold and damp. And when they got to the passenger side, Cassidy unlocked the back door and moved her purse off the seat. The woman climbed in carefully and Trevor lifted the shopping cart and set it in the truck bed. And when he got back in the driver's seat, he was soaking wet. And his wife gave him a look that said, I told you so, but also, I love you for being exactly this kind of idiot. Ma'am, I'm Cassidy, Trevor's wife. We're going to take you to the 3rd Avenue shelter. It should only take a few minutes, even with this traffic. Cassidy said it polite, but not overly warm, and Trevor could tell she was still on guard, which was fair enough. The drive started out quiet except for the sound of the rain pattering on the roof and the heater blowing on full blast. And Trevor kept glancing in the rearview mirror, checking on their passenger who was staring out the window with water dripping off her hair onto the seat. Then about 3 minutes in, Trevor saw the woman lean forward slightly and look at Cassidy's reflection in the rearview mirror. And her eyes narrowed like she was studying something. And Cassidy must have felt it too because she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The woman's voice came from the back seat, careful and tentative. Excuse me, I hope this doesn't sound strange, but did you say your name was Cassidy? Did you go to Lincoln High School? And the question hung in the air for a second, while Cassidy's head whipped around to look at the woman directly. Yeah, I did. How did you know that? Cassidy's voice had gone from polite distant to confused surprised in about 2 seconds, and Trevor glanced between his wife and the woman in the mirror, trying to figure out what was happening. The woman was studying Cassidy's face now, with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. Your name, your voice, something just felt familiar. Lincoln High seemed like the right place, and there was something in her voice that Trevor couldn't quite identify. Something that sounded like recognition mixed with sadness. Cassidy stared at the woman, really looked at her, taking in the wet gray hair and the weathered face, and the eyes that were light brown or maybe hazel, and Trevor could see his wife's brain working trying to place this person. I'm sorry, I don't think I remember you. When were you at Lincoln? Cassidy asked it gentle because she clearly felt bad for not recognizing someone who apparently recognized her, and the woman's expression shifted to something closed off. A long time ago, I must be mistaken. You just have one of those faces, I guess. Sorry for being weird. The woman sat back and turned to look out the window again, and the rest of the drive was awkward silence, except for Trevor giving quiet directions to the shelter. Cassidy kept sneaking glances at the woman in the rearview mirror like she was trying to solve a puzzle, and the woman kept her face turned away like she regretted saying anything at all. They pulled up to the Gospel Mission Shelter on 3rd Avenue, and the building was lit up with people coming and going through the front doors, and Trevor got out and grabbed the shopping cart from the truck bed while the woman climbed out slowly. He walked her to the entrance, and before she went inside, he pulled out his wallet and took out 2 20s, all the cash he had on him, and pressed them into her hand. Please take this. Get yourself something warm to eat. And here's my business card. If you ever need medical help or anything at all, you can call me, okay? I work with the ambulance service, but I'll pick up. The woman looked at the money in the card like she might cry, and her voice came out thick. You're a good man, thank you, both of you. I hope you know how lucky you are to have each other. She walked into the shelter with her shopping cart and disappeared into the crowd of people seeking warmth and safety for the night, and Trevor jogged back to the truck where Cassidy was sitting with her phone in her hand staring at nothing. He got in and cranked the heat back up. You okay, babe? That was kind of weird with the Lincoln High thing, right? Cassidy didn't answer right away, just kept staring at her phone screen, and when she finally looked at him, her face was doing something Trevor had learned meant her brain was spinning on something she couldn't let go of. It was really weird, like she knew me, but I can't place her at all. And the way she was looking at me in the mirror, Trev, it wasn't just casual recognition. It was like she was trying to decide whether to say something more. They drove home in near silence, and Cassidy kept glancing at Trevor like she wanted to say something, but couldn't figure out how to start. And when they got back to their apartment in Selwood, she went straight to the closet where they kept storage boxes and started pulling them out. "What are you looking for?" Trevor asked while hanging up his wet jacket, and Cassidy was already elbow deep in a box labeled "high school stuff" in her handwriting. "I don't know. I just have this feeling like I should know who that was. Something about her voice or her eyes. I can't explain it, but it's driving me crazy." She pulled out her yearbook from 2009, the year she graduated, and started flipping through pages while sitting cross-legged on their bedroom floor. Trevor watched his wife obsess over student pictures and candid shots for almost an hour, and finally she closed the book and put her head in her hands, looking frustrated and exhausted. "I don't know, maybe I'm going crazy. Maybe she just had a generic face, or I'm projecting or something. But I can't shake this feeling that she matters, that I'm supposed to remember her." Trevor sat down next to her and pulled her into a hug. "It's late and we're both fried. Why don't we sleep on it? And if you still feel weird tomorrow, we can figure it out, okay?" Cassidy nodded, but Trevor could tell she wasn't going to sleep well, could tell this mystery was going to eat at her until she solved it. And something in his gut said that woman in the rain was going to change their lives in ways neither of them could predict yet. Cassidy Ross didn't sleep that night, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Trevor snored softly next to her, and her brain spun in circles trying to place that woman's face. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep entirely and went back to the living room where her yearbook was still sitting on the floor. She made coffee and sat cross-legged on the couch, flipping through pages she hadn't looked at in probably a decade, past the candid shots of football games and prom and theater productions, straight to the back where the staff photos lived in neat rows of professionally taken headshots. Teachers, administrators, counselors, custodians, all the adults who'd made Lincoln High run back when Cassidy was a senior in 2009, and she studied each face looking for anything that matched the woman from the bus stop. Her eyes landed on a photo 3rd row down, a woman probably in her early 40s with dark hair cut short and light brown eyes and a genuine smile, and the caption underneath read, "Linda Marshall, school counselor." Cassidy's heart started pounding because she suddenly remembered that face up close, the small scar above the left eyebrow, the voice saying everything would be okay. The shape of the face was the same, even though it was 15 years younger and probably 30 pounds heavier and infinitely less weathered. But she couldn't let herself jump to conclusions because wanting to see a connection and actually having one were two completely different things. She grabbed her phone and pulled up Google, typed in Linda Marshall Lincoln High School, Portland, and scrolled through results until she found an archived staff directory from 2019 that listed her as no longer on staff. Cassidy sat there with her coffee going cold and her mind racing through memories she usually kept locked away in the part of her brain labeled "Before College, Do Not Open," and she had to face the fact that if this was the same person, then she needed to tell Trevor things about her past she'd never fully explained to anyone. The sun was starting to come up when Trevor shuffled into the living room in his pajama pants, looking confused about why his wife was awake at 6 on a Saturday. "Babe, what are you doing? Did you sleep at all?" Cassidy looked up at him with tears already forming. "I think I know who she is, but if I'm right, then I need to tell you something about my senior year of high school that I've never told anyone, not even you." Trevor sat down next to her, immediately going into full concern mode, and Cassidy took a shaky breath before the words started spilling out in a way they never had before. "My mom left when I was 17, just packed a bag one day and moved to California with some guy she met online. And my dad completely fell apart, started drinking, lost his job at the warehouse, and by the time I was a senior, we'd lost our apartment. I was technically homeless for most of that year. I slept in our car when Dad had enough gas to park somewhere safe, or I couch surfed with friends when I could, or sometimes I just stayed at school as late as possible doing homework in the library until they kicked me out." Trevor's face went through about 17 emotions while she talked, shock and hurt and confusion about why she'd never said anything. And Cassidy kept going because if she stopped, she might not start again. There was a counselor at Lincoln, Mrs. Marshall, Linda Marshall, and she figured out what was happening, even though I tried really hard to hide it. And she just quietly started helping me without making it into this big charity thing that would have destroyed what was left of my pride. Cassidy's voice cracked, remembering how Mrs. Marshall would leave her office door unlocked early in the morning so Cassidy could use the staff bathroom to shower, how she'd bring extra lunch and leave it on her desk with a note saying she'd packed too much, how she'd stayed late helping with college applications and scholarship essays that got Cassidy a full ride to Portland State. She had this little scar above her left eyebrow, and she used to tell me, "You're braver than you think," whenever I wanted to give up. And I got out, I got to college, and I just ran from everything that reminded me of that year, including her. I never even said thank you properly. I just disappeared. Dad eventually got sober and moved to Medford. We talk sometimes, but it's never been the same. Trevor pulled her into a hug, and she could feel him processing everything, could feel the slight hurt that she hadn't trusted him with this part of her story. But his voice was gentle when he said, "And you think the woman from last night was her?" Cassidy nodded against his shoulder. "The eyes are the same, and the face shape, but it's been 15 years, and homelessness ages people so fast. I keep telling myself I'm seeing what I want to see, but my gut says it's her. And if it is, then Trev, she saved my life, and now she's the one sleeping in the rain." They sat there holding each other while the Saturday morning light came through their apartment windows. And finally, Trevor said what Cassidy was already thinking. "We need to find her. Like right now. We need to go back to that shelter." They threw on clothes and drove straight to the Gospel Mission on 3rd Avenue. But when they asked the front desk staff if Linda was still there, the guy shook his head. "Shelters don't work like hotels, man. People leave during the day. We only do overnight intake. She probably left around 7 this morning when we served breakfast." Cassidy felt panic rising in her chest. "Do you know where she goes during the day? Does she have regular spots?" The guy shrugged. "I don't track people's movements. You could check the soup kitchens or the day centers, or just walk around a downtown. Most folks have spots they return to." They spent that entire Saturday driving around downtown Portland, checking every shelter and soup kitchen and warming center they could find, and nobody had seen Linda, or if they had, they weren't telling two random people who showed up asking questions. Sunday came and went with more searching, and Monday morning Cassidy called in sick. Trevor skipped his shift swap with Brad because finding this woman had become the only thing that mattered. By Wednesday, Cassidy was starting to lose hope, sitting at their kitchen table with her head in her hands, while Trevor made calls to other paramedics he knew, asking if they'd encountered anyone matching Linda's description. "Hey, it's Trevor Ross. Yeah, from Station 12. Weird question, but have you guys picked up or seen a homeless woman? Late 50s, gray hair, usually has a shopping cart. Last seen around Morrison and 3rd? He called 6 different medics he knew from various stations around the city, and on the 7th call, his buddy Marcus from Station 8 said he'd seen someone matching that description near the I-405 underpass off Everett Street, where a small homeless encampment had set up. Thursday morning, Cassidy went to work but spent her lunch break calling homeless outreach organizations from a list Trevor had found online. And she described Linda to every intake worker and case manager who'd answer the phone, until finally a woman from Portland Homeless Family Solutions said she recognized the description. "Yeah, I know Linda. Doesn't talk much about her past, but she's been on the streets about 3 years. Usually stays near the freeway, overpasses, because they provide some rain cover. If you're trying to reach her, I can pass along a message next time I do rounds." Cassidy left her name and number and a message that just said, "Someone from Lincoln High is looking for you. Please call," and then went back to teaching American literature to juniors, while her brain screamed at her to be out there searching. 10 days after that rainy Friday night, Trevor got a call from Marcus saying he'd just transported someone from the I-405 underpass and saw a woman matching Linda's description still there. And by the time Trevor called Cassidy, she was already leaving school early, claiming a personal emergency. They drove to the underpass off Everett Street and parked on the street, and when they walked down the embankment, they found a small cluster of tents and tarps and shopping carts, maybe 8 or 10 people living in the dirt and mud under the constant roar of highway traffic overhead. Cassidy spotted her sitting on a piece of cardboard next to a shopping cart, wearing different clothes but the same exhausted expression, and her heart was pounding so hard she thought she might pass out. She approached slowly with Trevor hanging back to give them space, and she sat down on the ground a few feet away from Linda, trying not to cry. "Excuse me, Linda. I don't know if you remember me from the other night. My husband gave you a ride to the shelter." Linda looked up and her eyes were wary, and Cassidy took a breath before asking the question that had been eating her alive for 10 days. "Did an outreach worker pass along a message from me?" Linda shook her head, looking confused. Cassidy pressed on. "Can I ask you something? Did you ever work at Lincoln High School?" The woman's entire body went rigid, and her face did something between fear and shame, and the silence stretched out so long, Cassidy thought she might not answer at all. But finally Linda's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Yes, a long time ago, I was a counselor there." Cassidy felt tears spill over, and her voice shook when she said the words she'd been rehearsing for days. "Mrs. Marshall, it's me. It's Cassidy Chen. I graduated in 2009. You helped me when I was homeless my senior year. You let me shower in the staff bathroom, and you brought me food, and you helped me get into college." Linda's eyes went wide and filled with tears, and her hands started trembling where they were clutched in her lap. "Cassidy, oh my God, Cassidy, I wasn't sure if you'd remember me. You look so different, so grown up and put together." They were both crying now, and Cassidy scooted closer. "I remember you. You had a scar above your eyebrow, and you told me I was braver than I thought. You saved my life, Mrs. Marshall, and I never thanked you. I just ran away to college and never looked back, and I'm so sorry." Linda reached out and took Cassidy's hand, and her voice cracked completely. "You don't have anything to apologize for. You survived and you built a life. That's all I ever wanted for any of you kids. I'm just sorry you have to see me like this." Cassidy squeezed her hand and looked at this woman who'd once been her lifeline and was now living under a freeway, and she made a decision right there in the mud and the traffic noise. "Mrs. Marshall, can I take you to breakfast? Just to talk, to catch up. I need to know what happened. I need to understand how you ended up here." Linda hesitated, pride and shame fighting across her face. But finally she nodded, and Cassidy helped her stand up and walked her back to where Trevor was waiting. And for the first time in 10 days, Cassidy felt like maybe she could start repaying a debt she'd carried for 15 years without even knowing it. Cassidy took Mrs. Marshall to a diner 3 blocks from the underpass, one of those 24-hour places with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since 1995. And when the server brought menus, Linda just stared at hers like she couldn't remember the last time someone asked her what she wanted to eat, instead of just handing her whatever was available. Trevor sat next to Cassidy and gave her space to lead the conversation. And for the first 20 minutes, they just made small talk while Linda ate pancakes and eggs like she was trying not to look desperate, even though it was obvious she was starving. Finally, Cassidy couldn't wait anymore and asked the question that had been burning in her chest since she found her under that freeway. "Mrs. Marshall, what happened? How did you end up out here? The last thing I knew you were at Lincoln helping kids, and now you're sleeping under overpasses, and I need to understand." Linda set down her fork and her hands were shaking slightly when she started talking, and the story came out in pieces like she was pulling it from somewhere she'd buried deep. "After you graduated, I stayed at Lincoln for another 9 years. Kept doing the same work, helping kids who were struggling, and I loved it. I really did. But then 7 years ago, my husband David had a heart attack. Completely out of nowhere. He was only 56 and healthy as far as we knew." Her voice cracked saying his name, and Cassidy reached across the table to hold her hand. "He was in the hospital for 3 weeks before he passed, and the bills from that, even with insurance, they just piled up, $60,000 in medical debt that I couldn't pay, and I just fell apart. Like completely fell apart in a way I didn't know was possible." She explained how the depression hit her so hard she could barely function, how she started missing work because she couldn't get out of bed, how she'd have panic attacks in her office and breakdowns in front of students. And after 6 months, the school district suggested she take early retirement, which was a nice way of saying they were letting her go. "I tried to find other work, but I was 51 years old with a mental health crisis on my record, and nobody wanted to hire me. I burned through our savings paying the mortgage and David's medical bills, And by 2019, I'd missed so many mortgage payments the bank foreclosed. Linda's eyes were wet, and her voice was barely above a whisper. I couch surfed with former coworkers for almost a year. Told myself it was temporary, that I'd get back on my feet. But my daughter Emily and I had this huge fight during all of it. She thought I was pushing her away, and she was right. I was drowning, and I didn't know how to let her save me. Cassidy felt tears streaming down her face, listening to how the woman who'd saved her had lost everything piece by piece. And Linda kept going, like now that she'd started, she couldn't stop. I ended up in shelters by 2020, and then on the streets when the shelters were full, and it's been 3 years of just surviving. And I was too ashamed to reach out to anyone from my old life because how do you call someone and say, hey, remember me, I used to help people, and now I'm the one who needs help? The three of them sat in that booth crying while other diners pretended not to notice. And when Linda finally stopped talking, Cassidy said the only thing that made sense. Let me help you now, the way you helped me. Please let me do that. Linda tried to refuse at first, said she didn't want to be anyone's charity project, but Cassidy was relentless in the gentlest way possible. I'm going to get you a hotel room for a few nights, just to get you out of the cold and the rain. No strings attached. You can leave whenever you want, but please just let me do this. They checked Linda into a Motel 6 near 82nd Avenue. Nothing fancy but clean and warm, with a real bed and a shower, and Cassidy left her with toiletries and clean clothes and her phone number. Over the next 3 weeks, Cassidy visited every few days after school, letting the grading pile up in ways that would have horrified her a month ago, bringing food and helping Linda navigate the maze of social services, and Trevor used his EMS connections to get her linked up with mental health resources that had sliding scale fees. 6 weeks in, they'd helped her apply for transitional housing programs that had wait lists stretching months into the future, and they'd been extending the hotel stay in small chunks, but it was eating into their savings in a way that wasn't sustainable. Trevor and Cassidy had a long conversation one night about boundaries and timelines and what they could realistically handle, and they decided to offer their spare room as a temporary bridge until transitional housing opened up. Mrs. Marshall, we have a spare bedroom. It's small, and it's currently full of boxes, but we can clear it out. Would you consider staying with us just until your housing application comes through? Linda's face went through pride and shame and gratitude all at once, and she accepted with the caveat that this was temporary and she'd contribute however she could. Living together revealed how deep Linda's trauma went, the nightmares and the anxiety and the times she'd just shut down completely, and Cassidy had to fight her own savior complex when she wanted to fix everything immediately. Trevor reminded her gently that support wasn't the same as control, that recovery happened on Linda's timeline, not theirs, and they settled into a routine of therapy appointments and job training programs and slowly rebuilding. Cassidy helped facilitate contact with Linda's daughter Emily, who lived in Seattle, and that first phone call was brutal. Emily angry about years of feeling shut out, and Linda trying to explain through tears that she'd been drowning and didn't know how to ask for help. They agreed to meet at a neutral coffee shop with Cassidy there for support, and it was awkward and painful, but it was a start. 2 months into living with them, Linda left one morning without a word, just packed her few belongings and disappeared, and Cassidy found her back at the I-405 underpass, sitting on the same piece of cardboard. I can't do this. It's too much. Being inside, being around people who expect things from me, I'm better out here. Cassidy sat down next to her in the dirt and didn't argue. Just said, okay, but I'm not giving up on you. When you're ready to come back, the door's open. And 3 days later, Linda showed up at their apartment looking exhausted and said, I'm ready to try again. Therapy helped her understand that the urge to self-sabotage was part of the trauma, that healing wasn't linear, and slowly she started to believe stability might actually last. 14 months after that rainy night encounter, Linda moved into permanent, affordable housing through a program for formerly homeless adults, a small studio apartment in Gresham that was hers, actually hers with her name on the lease. She'd gotten a part-time job at a senior community center, helping coordinate activities, and her relationship with Emily had progressed to regular video calls and occasional visits that were still sometimes tense, but genuinely trying. She came to Cassidy and Trevor's apartment for dinner once a month, And at one of those dinners, she saw a photo on their wall from Cassidy's college graduation and completely broke down. I used to wonder if any of it mattered, if any of you kids I helped actually made it out, and here you are with a whole life and a career and a family, and you came back for me when you didn't have to. Cassidy was crying too when she said, "You're the reason I became a teacher. I wanted to be you, to see struggling kids the way you saw me." And Linda looked at Trevor. "And you're the reason I'm sitting here at all. You stopped in the rain when you could have just kept driving, just like I stopped for Cassidy all those years ago." A few months after Linda settled in, Cassidy approached her principal at Roosevelt High about their upcoming Mental Health and Resilience Week, and she pitched having Linda come speak as a community member, sharing her story of overcoming adversity. The principal approved it through proper channels, and Linda stood in front of an auditorium of teenagers and told them the truth, that helpers sometimes need help, that falling apart doesn't mean you're broken forever, that one person stopping can change the trajectory of an entire life. After the assembly, a quiet junior named Maya approached Linda on her own, eyes red and hands shaking, and Cassidy watched Linda sit beside this girl and look at her with the same expression she'd given Cassidy 15 years ago. "Someone once stopped for me in the rain. That's all it takes. One person who sees you and refuses to look away. Let us see you okay?" Maya nodded with tears in her eyes, and Cassidy felt the circle complete itself, kindness rippling forward through time in ways none of them could have predicted. That night, Trevor and Cassidy drove home through Portland rain that looked exactly like it had that November night, and Cassidy said what they were both thinking. "We almost didn't stop. We were tired and wanted to get home, and if we hadn't, I never would have known." Trevor squeezed her hand. "But we did stop, and she's okay now. And that kid Maya has someone looking out for her. That's how it works. We just keep stopping for each other. Sometimes the people who save us don't know their impact until years or decades later when life brings them back around. Sometimes helping a stranger in the rain means repaying a debt you didn't know you owed. And sometimes being broken doesn't disqualify you from helping others. It just means you understand their pain better than anyone else could." If this story reminded you that kindness doesn't expire, that the helpers sometimes need help too, that recovery is messy and slow but possible with community, hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thanks for being here with us, and remember, one person stopping can change everything. So be the person who stops.